officially start this podcast.
Sure thing.
Instead of all our cocaine talk. What? No. So welcome to 613BeerCast. I'm Katy.
I'm Chuck.
And
I'm April.
Woo! 3 people today. It's like we didn't even do a podcast before.
That's right. We got our research assistant behind the mics this time.
Exactly.
Instead of hiding on the couch.
Slipping us little tidbits of information.
What are we going to do? What are we going to do about finding information in the middle of the podcast now?
I know. If you hear like a big silence in like the talking, it's because we're being fed information from April.
And Katy didn't edit it out.
No, I didn't. I'm lazy. Editing is hard, guys.
It is hard.
It's really hard. Which I'm going to edit out totally. Now that I just did that. God damn it.
Now that you won't even know what that reference was.
You won't know exactly what that was. Anyway, we're talking about New England IPAs tonight. And we have some treats from Ontario and from abroad. I did like a hand motion, which you can't see, but appreciate it nonetheless.
It was impressive.
Thank you. Our first beer, before we get into the topic, all hopped up on sugar.
But wait, why are we all hopped up on sugar? We can't possibly have been...
Really, this is totally all the sugar. This is what happens when you give, like, old people sugar.
Wait, she just called us old.
We are old, okay? I wake up every morning going, God damn it.
I think we are too old for 4 sugary FMBs.
That was a lot.
Like that.
That was a lot of sugar. And thankfully, we're going back to actual beer now.
Yes. After a slight detour in our content, interesting, but a detour nonetheless.
Yes.
We're back into beer and a controversial style, even.
It is, yes. So we're talking about New England IPAs. Ooh. It's going to be one of those podcasts. So we're going to start off before we start talking about it with beer from Smuttynose that you guys brought.
Yes.
Finest Kind IPA, which I'm not sure, was this available at the LCBO at one point?
I think very briefly, I know their Baltic Porter was. I'm not sure if Finest Kind made it to Ottawa. I think they briefly had it in the LCBO, but I'm just not sure it made it up to us.
Yeah. Now this is after Heady Topper, because I think Heady Topper was my introduction to the style. This is the second, what would be classified as a New England IPA. At the time, maybe they called it an East Coast IPA, but mostly they just called it an American IPA in the East Coast style.
Right.
Well, and Finest Kind doesn't actually fit what they consider a New England because it's not cloudy.
Sure, that's true.
So it is filtered. It's an actual filtered beer, and
it's a Whirlpool filtered beer.
So it doesn't fit what they call the style, but having done the research, New England IPA isn't actually a style anyway. New England IPA actually fits American Pale Ale.
Okay. So before we get started here and we go all crazy talking about New England IPAs, which I know we're going to get, it's going to be a tongue twister because we're going to say it so often. What is a New England IPA?
So in our research, we found sort of what the popular opinion is, I guess. And really it started off as what might be a more cloudy appearance, more tropical, fruity aroma. Flavors a little bit of still that grapefruit, but we're going more peach, melon, tangerine, and more quantified as a juicy flavor of hops rather than bitter. They also tend to have a more smooth and creamy mouthfeel with a soft finish and not as strong of that bitter finish like the West Coast style. It's usually unfiltered, and often has a very turbid appearance. This one being one of the more clear ones of the example, but like I think we said, it was an early example before that the cloudiness really took hold. And there's really no dankness or dry bitterness associated with it that usually comes from the West Coast style.
Right, and the classic example is Alchemist's famous Heady Topper. That's where the style seemed to have originated from, but then it's since evolved because I think the style has we have some examples here that I think will be very different from what Heady Topper is, and so it'll be interesting to see how the beers progress. And as I mentioned, we have this one's from
Smuttynose in New Hampshire,
and then we have some other ones from Ontario, and then we have one from
Maine.
Yeah. And then so it should be, we even have one local to Ottawa. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see the interpretations. And as was mentioned, there is no actual definition to the style. It just kind of arose. Some people really, really like it.
Yes.
Some people really, really hate it.
So,
Yes.
in doing a lot of research, it seemed like a lot of brewers, or even the gentleman who is in charge of like the Cicerone program, Ray Daniels, finds it, the haziness, the yeast suspension in the beer, very disturbing and not at all what a beer should be. So there's a few people that have been quoted as saying they really don't like it, and some people who say, but yeast adds a whole different layer to a beer. So you want to drink that, you want that in there. So it seems to be a very polarizing topic. And even actually the head brewer at Alchemist, when asked about it, he was like, I think it's kind of pretentious to call it its own style. So it's very divisive topic.
And there is that. I mean, if you came out with a beer that was different, would you want to be the one that says, oh, by the way, I created a new style of beer? So it's probably fair for him to come out and say that, no, I don't want it to be a style, but it's not really his call. I think it's going to be the beer drinking public in general that are going to determine whether or not this actually sticks as a style or just a slight variation. Given that definition and given the clear delineation between a West Coast IPA and what has become known as the New England IPA, I personally think it will evolve into its own style. I think it does stand out distinctly in look, taste, and feel that it would be very difficult to confuse the two.
I agree, and I think for me, what I've experienced. I like the style so far. I don't mind the yeast suspension. I think it's fine. There are other beers like Hefeweizen that have like a yeasty feel to it, so I don't know why an IPA can't have it. I think it's going to be very popular because it doesn't have the huge bitterness.
That's right.
At the end, like a West Coast IPA has. So I think this is going to be more of an approachable IPA. Because you do get that juicy tropical flavors more than you get the bitterness.
And that sort of leads into that first controversy, as we talked about a controversial style of beer, that first controversy that the yeast haze or the hop haze or whatever you want to call it, the haze and the turbidity of that. The controversy there is there are so many people that are such big sticklers for clarity that any type of cloudy beer is a result of a faulty or lazy brewing process. So they look at that style of beer and they just say, well, that brewer was lazy. I don't want that beer. And yet they're missing out, I think, on an entirely different experience.
For sure. And in several guidelines, having a hazy IPA would be, or a turbid IPA would be marks down. You don't fit the style guideline. But it definitely adds some interesting character to the beer. And it definitely looks very impressive when you pour it, too. It kind of looks awesome.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll get into... So this one, it's clear. It does have a little bit of a bitterness at the end.
You can tell this is definitely one of the earlier takes on the New England style. They hadn't quite pulled away from the West Coast style yet. It is a slightly softer West Coast IPA, is how I would describe this one.
And they continue to brew it. Like this is a fresh bottle. So Finest Kind will always be brewed like this, clear with this slight bitterness to it. So it's not a true West Coast, but it's not a true New England. It's kind of like a bridge between the two. So it's not cloudy, so you're not freaking people out because it's cloudy, but it's not so bitter that now I'm eating my hops. Like I've got a little bit of it, but it's not so strong that people are going, oh, I can't drink that. I don't like bitterness. I don't like hops. So I like it for that. To me, it's a very nice IPA.
So we're going to move on to Juicin, which was, I think, one of the first Ontario interpretations of the style.
I think it might be the first, or very close to the first. If somebody were to argue with me, I wouldn't argue hard against them. They showed me something that came around before. I remember this one. I remember Juicy Dream from Beyond the Pale,
which is being released again. So if you were hear this podcast, run over to Beyond the Pale and grab that beer.
I believe when we looked it up, Juicy Dream came out slightly before Juicin did.
Okay.
So when we did the initial research back when we first talked about the style, I believe that's kind of the way that they had come out because we were trying to figure out if there had been Ontario versions.
But it's definitely clear that Ontario was sort of picking it up at the same time altogether, sort of trying it out. And these ones came out. Now this one, we have been sitting on it for a little bit because we were thought about this as a podcast, and so I've been saving it so that we could come back to it. But I think it's going to have a little bit more shelf life than the average IPA.
There is some debate on that, though, because I've read some suggestions that the turbidity of the yeast in the hop will create some kind of yeast clumps. I'm making a clumping figure with my hands for those who can't see, and that'll cause those will drop out or just make little clumpy things in your glass.
And that is true. I have seen that happen on this particular beer and other beers like that, where if you let them settle for a little bit, you pour out the bottom. I don't know if this one actually happened a little bit.
April got the dregs.
Yeah, so I've seen worse than that. But what I mean by shelf life, I think in terms of the hop characteristics, like when you let an IPA sit for about maybe 4 months?
Well, so this one was canned by Sawdust in November of 2016.
So about 6 months? About 6 months. If you let an IPA sit about 6 months, you're starting to get into almost that barley wine, caramely
right.
Malt backbone, and the hops are gone. This one, the hops are still there. Mm-hmm. They're not as clear and aromatic as they were, but they are certainly still there, and it's still a juicy flavor to it.
There is still that big juicy flavor.
Yeah. So the first time we had this beer, it was very bright, very peachy. Mm-hmm. Now it's that soft, mellowy, peachy, a little bit more grapefruit to it.
Yes.
Than when we first had it, but it actually has held up quite nicely, and there really isn't that much in the way of clumping in the bottom. There's a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Like I said, I've seen worse, and because it's an unfiltered beer, it's gonna depend on where in the batch that you got it. Mm-hmm. If you got it early, you're probably not gonna have as much yeast. If you got it late in the fermenting tank, then you're probably gonna have more. And so it really depends on, I think, where that can got canned, or in this case can or bottle gets bottled relative to the rest of the batch coming out of the fermenting tank.
And I do love Sawdust City's label for this can. I love the whole needle injection into the peach. I think it's really, really awesome.
Yes.
I think it's they're telling you exactly what this is.
Yes.
And they actually call it New England style IPA.
Which
so
is
he
acknowledges it.
That's the style. That's what he was going for. That hazy, juicy, soft mouthfeel, and they did put oats in it for the soft mouthfeel. Mm-hmm. And I think, knowing Sam and the brewers at Sawdust, that they probably altered their water as well, because in our research we found out that was one of the other reasons for the soft mouthfeel. So, because it has all the qualities, when people describe a New England IPA, it has all those qualities. So the soft mouthfeel, the haziness, the yeast retention, the slightly creamy feel.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about, you mentioned oats and the water chemistry a little bit. What other things are, ingredient-wise, are distinctive of a New England IPA?
Yeah, so we did a little bit of a comparison. Like, what is different in a New England IPA than in a West Coast style IPA? And we kind of let us down, a few distinct. There's probably other subtle ones, but these ones we found were the big ones. And obviously, the first part was aggressive dry hopping. Dry hopping started with that West Coast IPA to really add the aromatics of hops to the beer. The New England style decided that, I don't want to just smell them kinda. I want to pop open that can and spread it around the room. Mm-hmm. And so the aggressively dry hop that added to that haze, the hop haze that comes out of that. That softer mouthfeel usually comes from wheat or flaked oats. So they added that in as opposed to West Coast style IPAs to get that sort of creamy mouthfeel going. As well, the water chemistry plays a big part in that mouthfeel. And so it's the balance of the chloride to sulfide, and in New England IPAs. And there's some debate on whether or not this started sort of accidentally or on purpose. Does New England water just have a higher chloride level in general compared to the West Coast, or did they change it to do that?
Okay.
Hard to say, but basically what generally is a higher chloride level in New England IPAs also adds to that softer mouthfeel. And of course, yeast. Always yeast comes down to, and most New England IPAs tend to use a lower attenuating strand of English yeast.
And I actually learned a new word while I was researching the yeast. I learned biotransformational.
Interesting.
So it's a yeast that can take one particular part of the beer, like say it'll consume like hop oils or whatever, and it'll transform it to another thing. So that it'll take one flavor and take it and turn it into something else.
Oh, interesting.
And so certain yeast strains, like you mentioned, are better adapt to doing that than others.
Right, and that's probably where that whole Vermont yeast
Exactly.
concept comes from.
And so that's something that people usually look for when they're making this quote-unquote style of beer.
The other part of that is with the hops that they use, they tend to not use the same kind as the West Coast. So trying to go for that softer, juicier peach and melon, they tend to use varietals that are not used in the West Coast, or smaller amounts of some of the same hops, but higher amounts of different hops, different varietals. So that was pretty interesting to find out too, that they were, not doing aggressive dry hop on Citra because they weren't looking for that bright lemony. They were looking for a softer peach or a melon.
Yeah, I seem to recall this style sort of coming to the fore as that New Zealand hop concept started coming out. The Nelson Sauvons, these things that added those tropical fruit flavors. Suddenly those were being used in these IPAs, and that sort of also distinguish them from the big C hops that the West Coast style uses.
So I'm going to move on quite quickly to a beer you bought on your trip. And this is from Foundation Brewing Company called Epiphany, Maine IPA.
Yeah, so the famous 7-Eleven. I think we've told that story a couple of times. This is where this one comes from. So it's a famous 7-Eleven on a traffic circle in Maine, just outside of Kittery, just outside of Portsmouth. And we walked in, and they had this there, and it looked like it was a brand new release, and we were only allowed to buy 2 cans. So we bought a can to bring back and try it out, thinking that it might fall into this range of for this podcast. Now, as Katy poured it, I'm pouring mine. It's pouring a little clearer.
But that doesn't mean I may have like the top sectional.
Mm-hmm.
Or
I don't know. They all
It's pretty clear. However, the nose is a bit not quite. I wouldn't say like peachy.
No, it's something else. It's more like. It's an interesting nose.
Oh, well, they actually put their hops on here. They use Cascade, Citra, Columbus, Ella, and Mosaic.
Okay.
Oh, interesting. So Mosaic is going to be one of those ones that tends to be used more in the New England style. But the rest are...
Ella's not one I'm familiar with, though.
No.
I do get a little bit of a cat pee note.
Yes.
And actually, this is really funny. I didn't read the can when you bought it.
You guys just don't read things.
Apparently.
No.
So, Epiphany was designed to showcase the glorious flavor and aromatics of hops without the astringent bitterness. Hop flavors of citrus, tropical fruit, pine, and spice blend to provide you with a sublimely juicy experience. East or West Coast? No. This is a Maine IPA.
I see. So now we're like we're not even going by like state or region. We're just going like particularly Maine.
Yes.
Interesting.
So now people are... And you know what? Realistically, that's probably the most fair way to look at an IPA. Especially if you're going to think about using local hops.
But are they using local hops?
I don't know.
I would hope so. If you're going to call it a Maine IPA and make that statement...
It is. It's
I would hope that you are using hops that you got from local people. Maybe not all of them, but I would hope that some of them are.
The ones that showcase the flavor.
Yeah.
Also, this is not an IPA, it's a double IPA.
What is the alcohol on this?
8%. They use Pilsner, Pale, and Oats.
Okay.
I see. So there is.
So it is a softer mouthfeel.
Yeah.
So I feel like they were trying to go for a mix of the two.
Right.
So the spicy, the piney, the little bit of citrusy, but then the softer mouthfeel and a little bit of a softer hop.
I will admit, I wouldn't, when drinking this, I wouldn't call it a double IPA. Like, it doesn't have that big, like, when I have a double IPA, I think of like a bam in your face hop, brashness, bitterness, scary, lips curl type experience. But this does not have that.
Actually, it's really funny that you say that. When we were in Maine, we stopped in at Tributary Brewing. So Tributary was opened by Todd Mott. Todd Mott used to brew over at Portsmouth. He's been brewing forever.
Probably one of the, what we might call the godfathers of New England brewing.
His beers are always extremely well balanced. Extremely. So we were super excited because he had a double IPA on. It actually drank like the Juicin.
Oh.
It was super peachy, super juicy, super balanced, no big, none of that what you think of for a double IPA. It was 9%. And we were like, Todd, this is very dangerous. And he says, yeah, I know. He said, and they actually had a winter saison that they had to take off because it clocked in at 9 something. And people were like, it's too easy to drink. I can't.
Dangerous. It's literally dangerous.
So yeah, they actually took it off and put it into little growlers because people were finding it too easy to put back. And we actually said to him, I was like, your double IPA is not at all what I thought it was going to be. I expected a balanced beer from him,
right,
but I expected it to be very malt forward. This was like drinking a New England IPA because it was slightly hazy. It was super juicy. And we took one look at it and I was like, interesting. And I was like, oh, this is I could keep drinking this all day. And he's like, yep. And then you wouldn't be able to move. And we were like, yes, it's a very dangerous beer. So just hearing you describe double IPA, I was like, oh, well, I've had another one that doesn't fit that at all.
Well, that's interesting. I like this new technique or way of brewing where that brashness is somewhat balanced. It's easier to drink, is easier to enjoy. You have to be careful and moderate yourself a bit better, but it's a better, nicer, more pleasant drinking experience.
And that came out in the conversation that we were having with Todd, and he sort of attributed it to experience.
Right.
He said, when I was younger and first brewing, I was doing the same thing that these brewers are doing right now as well. But I've been doing it for so long now that that's not what I want to do anymore. Now I want to really craft my product, and I suspect that we'll see some of that sort of bleed out as well. I'm hoping that we'll still have the big brashness because there's a place for it.
There is, yeah, for sure.
But I want to have a lot more of the balance as well, and be able to have some of both.
I think this kind of style of beer attracts more people. As give me a wild, crazy sea hopped beer with all the things in it, up the alcohol, up the bitterness. And I remember, I think I drank a beer called Palate Wrecker at one point, and it was insane. It totally did kill my palate. But at the time, I was like, yeah. And I would probably still go, yeah. But I would more, after a night of work, I'd rather have this.
Yeah. So actually, I wonder too if that has something to do with it. So if you say, you had this beer Palate Wrecker, or we've had these big West Coast IPAs. You have one, maybe two. You're not going to go and buy a 6-pack and take it to a party because you can't drink that.
Can you imagine? You're that person who brings Palate Wrecker to the party and you're known as that person.
You could bring a 6-pack of Juicin and drink it and still enjoy the barbecue and the food. You bring that big West Coast molar jumping out beer. So I wonder if there's a shift to that so that they can give hop heads a way to enjoy their hops without killing their palate every time, and thus they're more likely to buy more of the beer.
I would argue that the New England style doesn't guarantee that.
True.
And I would use the Great Rhythm experience as an example of that. So another brewery in the Portsmouth area, Great Rhythm Brewing, all they do is IPAs, basically, as far as I can tell. Really well-crafted IPAs. But when you go in there and you order a flight, what you get are 4 slightly different shades of orange, turbid, cloudy, juicy beers. And if you didn't know the name, you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. At least I couldn't.
Right.
Some of them tasted slightly brighter than others, but overall, the hop profiles only varied a tiny bit across them. I could taste the 4 differences, but I also didn't have a cold.
Right.
And I I was slower to drink in between them because you were driving that day.
Yes.
But there was after a bit, you could see the similar hops across all four. And once you've had four that carry some similar and only a couple different hops, they do start to blend together. So like at the end when we went to go finish them, I was like, I couldn't tell you which one.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you which one this is. It's, maybe it's that one. I don't know.
And sorry, just to go back, nothing shows the popularity of that style like the fest that we went to. What was it? 35 different breweries, 90 some odd different beers. And
I don't even remember.
I think about half of them were of that cloudy
interesting
IPA. Like it is definitely a style on the East Coast that if you're an East Coast brewery, you pretty much must have this on your menu. Otherwise, people just don't seem to take you seriously.
So, do you think we'll see like reinterpretations of different styles? Like, say, I don't like, for example, a red beer, generic red beer. Could some region take this beer and create, like, say, a New Mexico red? Or do you think that's possible for another style of beer?
Okay, so there was actually, when we were doing the research, and I was wondering if you wrote it down, but you didn't, there was actually a quote about that beer styles don't so much come and go as evolve over time. And that they have to. That, the New England IPAs happen because IPAs have evolved as consumers want different things, as brewers want to try different things. So I do think that, somebody over, when one place could take a red and do it their way, and somebody else could take a red and say, yeah, but I don't like this, let's try this. I mean, you do see it because sometimes you see reds with rye and you see reds with different things. I think that I just love the idea that beer evolves, that styles don't have to stay so rigid. And to say that they were always, to say that Pilsners were always like this, or to say that that Reds were always like that, is being too rigid and not really fair to the beer.
And we did see an example of that, actually, at Woodland and, the other place.
Which one?
The other one that did the Mexican blonde.
Oh, 21st Amendment.
Yes. So there were two...
there were Mexican corn lagers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And were not at all what I was expecting.
Certainly not the massively corn syrupy type of flavoring.
It was corn.
Yeah.
Not corn syrup.
But it was a blonde lager that was done in a Mexican style. And so, yes, I think these styles could in fact evolve into a regional interpretation if somebody is inventive enough to pick on a particular adjunct that is distinctive for their region.
So do you think that creates a problem then for certain, say the BJCP, who goes and classifies these styles?
Yes.
Does that make it hard for them to do that, or does that make it hard for a style to become a style?
The latter.
Yes. Well, I think it makes it very hard for them because they get a beer put down in front of them, and consumers and everybody goes, it's a really good beer, and BJCP judges go, yeah, but it's not style. And everybody goes, well, I don't get it. Like, why didn't you like it? And for them, it's not so much that whether or not they liked it or not, it's that it doesn't fit the style guidelines that they have. That makes it kind of hard for them because people assume that if they don't mark a beer to style, it means that they don't like it, and that's not true. So I think it's hard for them, but I also think it's really difficult for a beer like, say, a New England IPA to become a style, and that was one of the things. Numerous articles said that about whether or not it will become a style, and really, what one person had said was, "Does it really matter as long as consumers drink it? Consumers call it a style."
Yeah, and I think that's always been my argument against the BJCP. I love the BJCP for what they do. I think I think it has its place, but beer is a very subjective experience in terms of where the consumer and whoever is drinking it, do they enjoy it? Does it matter if it hits a style if you're enjoying what you're drinking? And BJCP doesn't seem to want to quickly adjust to the styles that consumers do.
I think it's very hard for them.
It has to be, because how do you define a flash-in-the-pan style? Is it going to last long enough?
Exactly.
Right. So, right now, obviously we're seeing this New England IPA shoot up and be the next hot thing. 5 years from now, will it be a thing? I actually think it probably will be.
I think it's very popular. I think it will probably have some lasting appeal. So we're on to our next beer now, and we're having a Sunsplit IPA from Dominion City. I have to thank Nathan to introducing me to this beer, because he was very kind and traveled across the city and brought me a growler of this beer. And thank you so much, because this beer is really good.
Thanks, Nathan.
It's super delicious. And I rented a car to go to New York City, and I went and I bought like 1 million growlers of it because I enjoyed it so much. And so they call this they don't call it a New England IPA. They call it a Vermont style IPA, which is the same thing.
That's where a lot of it is originated
Right.
from, and they just sort of genericized it because so many other New England states jumped on that bandwagon.
Well, and because it tends to be whispered that it started in Vermont with Heady Topper, and it's got this whole lore around it. And as much as, Alchemist, he wants to say, hey, like, I'm not going to say we start a new style. Like, that would be kind of... The lore behind it is Heady Topper was the first, and everybody is trying to do their version of a Heady Topper.
Yeah, it's true. And I think this is a great local example of it. This is readily available at Dominion City. I think they're even planning on canning it for the summer.
Oh, very nice.
It's been very popular, and I can see why. It's very approachable. It's very juicy. It's just... I can just go through this so quickly.
Yeah, and that hoppy bitterness that turns so many people off is not there.
No, it's just... It's very, very fruity. It's a nice drink to have.
It's a pretty color.
It is.
Yeah, there's that too.
It's a pretty... It reminds me of like a grapefruit juice, like a fresh squeezed grapefruit juice, that slightly cloudy, slightly yellowy. Like, it looks like summer. Like, to me, it looks like something I would want to drink outside on a patio.
No,
and it tastes like it.
Yeah, and it's crazy that they brought it out. I guess they thought we needed a vitamin C injection for the winter. Thank you, Josh.
Yes, that was a good idea.
Good idea, yeah. But I can totally... This is the beer of summer. And with that in cans, it will be a bestseller for them.
Yeah.
Throw that in, especially because the cans, especially because it won't ruin the hops. You can throw it on the patio.
Exactly.
Just drink it straight out of the can. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So they have a great winner here, and it'll be interesting to see. We mentioned that Beyond the Pale has their own interpretation of a New England IPA, which I saw today. This podcast will be out 2 weeks to the day, so hopefully they have some left. I don't know. Look for it.
I'm sure they'll brew it again if it sells out that quickly.
Yeah, but go check it out. They probably might have some left, or you might be able to find it on tap at some bars. There are some great examples of the style here in Ottawa, so check them out.
Now, the last bit is
Dum-da-da-dum.
that last controversy about this style.
Are you talking about adding extras?
I am. This one was the epitome of the lazy. Well, might be cheap, lazy, however you want to call it. Now there was the rumors. Now it would have stayed rumors, except there was actually a pro brewer that came onto a podcast and admitted as much. So we know this happens, and as a consumer, my ask is, do I care? I don't know. Does it ruin the flavor of the beer?
So
I don't know. I would have to try.
Before we express our opinions on this, Chuck is talking about brewers adding things like flour or other adjuncts.
An apple puree or fruit puree in general to get that turbidity.
So I have a question for you. I've heard two different interpretations of this. One, I've heard that the fruit puree or pectin is an interpretation of a totally another style of beer. That's called a milkshake.
Oh.
Yes, I know.
Okay, so now we're on a different thing. Well, see, and this is just it. This is it. Why should I care about what's added? Maybe I'm just creating a brand new style.
So I've heard that's because I did a little bit of research, and somebody was talking about how they were talking about the difference between New England IPA and the milkshake beers. And the idea between the milkshake beers, which are extremely thick. Thicker than if you've had a Sunsplit by Dominion Cities or a Juicin by Sawdust. It looks like a literal milkshake.
Yes.
In your glass. And they say that that's caused by either adding pectin or fruit puree. Can I say puree? No. Fruit puree to the beer. And that causes it. Now, the flour is a different thing.
Yes.
So in the research that I did before to make the notes, when you and I were doing it together and I was reading all the articles, both puree and flour have been commented on as being an inexpensive way to get the turbid, thicker look of a New England IPA or a Vermont-style IPA without the added cost of hops and oats.
Interesting.
So it tends to be something that homebrewers use a lot because, of course, not to take anything away from homebrewers, but they are trying to brew beer on the cheap rather than at the professional level.
And they also have the opportunity to experiment.
That's right.
More than, say, commercial brewers.
So we actually heard a rumor while we were in New Hampshire that New England brewers themselves, that there are a few who are newer that are adding flour to their beer to get that cloudiness. Because being newer, you want to go with the styles that are popular, but being newer, you don't have the money. So they are adding flour, and puree tends to be a teeny tiny bit more expensive. So they're starting with the flour with the idea of, well, we're trying it. This is our pilot. So, it's cloudy, but it's not, we're working on it. And then the next step is to add the puree. And what started the whole controversy, like you said, it was an actual brewer who was on a podcast who was like, yeah, we add puree and flour. We totally do. And then, but there are other brewers who come right out and say that that's not how you brew a beer at all.
So it'd be interesting to see, and maybe this is a future podcast thing. Can we actually get a hold of some beers that are brewed with fruit puree? God damn
fruit
it.
Puree.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And flour, and actually see if we can. Is it tasteable?
I would
love
love to.
Is Sawdust City? Do they brew it with flour?
Well, according to their ingredient list, no. And I think in Ontario you have to disclose all ingredients.
I don't think they do.
Oh, really?
I'm not sure.
I'd have to go back to the Excise Act. Find that section on
I don't think
ingredients.
they're actually mandated to.
Listen closely for the next time we read directly from the Excise Act.
Yes, I know. But it'll be interesting to see, like, if we can get our hands on something that is actually known to be brewed with flour or pectin or.
Yeah. Part of the other part of the controversy that I was reading in doing all that is that there are a number of brewers who may do it that would never admit to it because it is considered lazy and cheap. So they may do it, but they will never say that they do it. So unless they're mandated to put all ingredients on a bottle, which in the States, specifically New Hampshire, you do not have to. You have to put ABV, I think. I don't know. Their labels are weird. But you do not have to put all your ingredients.
I know in New York you don't have to put ABV.
Yeah, it's really difficult because you don't know what you're drinking.
Yeah. It's difficult. I know there has been. I think the reason why I know. This is Katy after like 15 beers. The reason why I know that there isn't labeling requirements is because there's been a movement in Ontario by Crystal Luxmore, as well as a few other people, to require the labeling.
Right.
And so that's why I'm unsure if these people are not doing it just because they're doing it a good spirit.
Right.
Or if they're doing it, or if it's actually real.
I think I might have been naive then in thinking, I just assumed that Ontario, you had to put what was in it on it.
And so there's a movement to like have both the ingredients and the calorie content as well. And I would agree that both are very important. Because you don't know,
I think so
you don't
too.
know what you're drinking.
Yeah.
Really.
I think so too, because I mean, unless something says, "Hey, I'm a peanut butter porter," how do you know that somebody hasn't made something with nuts in it? And then you have somebody like, I mean, it's not like you're saying somebody with celiac is picking up a beer and assuming that it's going to be gluten free, unless it says gluten free, right?
Exactly.
But there are other ingredients that people put in it. Like, how would somebody not know based on this label of a peach that there's not peaches in here? Well, what if I'm allergic to peaches? then I go, are there actual peaches in there? And I will say, because it happens a lot, there are hops that give a grapefruit quality to beer. People on certain heart medications cannot have grapefruit. So there have been numerous festivals that I've poured at where I say there are notes of grapefruit where the person goes, oh, I can't have grapefruit. And I have to be able to say, no, there's no grapefruit in this beer. Now, for some beers, Pink Fuzz, you can't actually say that. However,
Golden Beach,
you can, right? So it's important to know what's in it because you don't know if somebody has a medication, if somebody has an allergy. You know, I know people who are allergic to apples. Well, if there's an apple puree in a beer and I don't know that and I give them the beer,
you're now at fault.
Exactly. So I completely agree with that. And again, I think I was just naive to assume.
Yeah.
Mostly, okay, and I'll admit, most of that comes from looking at Sawdust cans. They are pretty good at putting what's in it.
I will admit, I have no reason to think that Sawdust City would put anything other than the actual ingredients. But I was thinking of other breweries that maybe just have like a generic ingredient list, like hops, yeast, malts.
Yeah, not that they're trying to hide anything. Let's make it clear here. We don't.
No.
There's
no requirement.
Yeah, I would love, and if anybody's ever actually pulled up the Excise Act, it's huge and it's very daunting. But I will now want to go back through and see if there's anything in there about ingredients. There probably isn't. There was stuff about containers and what classifies as what, but it's a huge document.
April's now our legal expert.
Oh God, no.
And I think with that, do you guys, for the finishing point of this podcast, do you like New England IPAs, Chuck?
I love New England IPAs. I don't think they will replace my love of West Coast IPAs. Oh. I think they are, what's the word I'm looking for?
Equal?
Well, yeah, but there's a better word than that.
Like this.
Anyway, cut this out.
I will not.
I know you won't.
Dear future Katy.
Yeah. No, I think they're the same. Like in terms of where I feel about them, and I would want at least a half dozen of each in my fridge at all times.
Yeah, I like all beer. I just want a half dozen of each style in my fridge, please.
Well, that's what I have.
How about you, April?
I am definitely an East Coast style.
Yeah.
I prefer this. I like the hot bombs. Like, I don't mind a good West Coast, but I could drink this little growler of Dominion City all by myself. Like, I love
100%.
But I love this style. Like, and I love when we go down to New Hampshire and the number of this style that are out there and that I have options. So I'm a pro New England IPA.
The household is split. Well, not really split, but yeah. Anyway, I will agree with you. I will agree with April that I'm really loving this style a lot. I actually had I had Sunsplit before I left to New York, and then in New York I had a very classic C-hop beer, Money IPA by I believe it's Barrier Brewing Company in New York, and honestly I found it overwhelming, and I was like, oh, it smells like weed.
You were a hophead, Katy.
I know. But it was very overwhelming to me to have. It was very. I would actually describe it as dank, and I got that, and I was like, I don't know if I like this anymore.
Uh-oh.
I don't know if this is good.
Changing palates.
I'm not sure if Katy can take this. And I got a crowler of it and everything. I was kind of like, So I think this may be my new thing.
All right.
I'm good with this. More people want to play around with this style. I'm like that.
Well, as you all know, if listening to me long enough, I drink whatever style is not the last one I drink. So
literally will drink anything. As April chokes on her beer. And that's going to be a very nutritious beer to choke on because it has lots of yeast particles.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'm going to end this podcast.
Who wants to do the last? Do we want to give April
I think that's what I was actually thinking the same thing.
Oh,
right.
So April has to do the outro this time.
Oh, dear. You guys are mean. Join the conversation on 613 After Dark on Facebook, 613BeerCast on Twitter, and 613BeerCast on Instagram.
There you go.
Perfect.
Well done.
We'll talk to you next week.